Hello and welcome back to our study of Peninei Halacha, the teachings of Rabbi Eliezer Melamed Shlita. We find ourselves midweek, Yom Revi'i. Continue our learning. We ask you to please continue davening for Chalei Tzvah Gana Yisrael, for Shlomo B'tzua Yisrael, safety of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. We learn each day Le'ilin Nishmat Ser and Daniel Shimon ben Harav Daron v'Shel Yishem Kam Damo. Next chapter, Seder HaOlim. Tiknu Chachamim sheBa'aliyah Harishona Yichabdu Kohen. So Chazal instituted that the first aliyah, the first one called to the Torah, should be given to a Kohen. B'shni Levi, b'shlishis Yisrael. Second to a Levi, then the third to a Yisrael. V'ta'am takon asam. So what's the reason for this institution? B'pnei darchei shalom. The Gemara says it's ways of peace, paths of peace. Shleivo l'riv al hakibud shebaliyah harishona. So that no one should come to have any argument or dispute over who should have the first aliyah. V'af shetakon asam nikba'al l'shabbasos. And even though that this takana was originally instituted for Shabbos, because we have a larger crowd in shul, which is still the case today. And there's a greater worry, a greater concern that perhaps some sort of dispute will arise over the aliyahs. So even though it was instituted originally for Shabbos, but they included it should be any time that we lane, Monday, Thursday, etc. If there is no Kohen in the shul, Korin Yisrael Aliyah Rishon, you can call a Yisrael to the first Aliyah. Ve'ein malam acharav Levi. Once you call Yisrael, you cannot call a Levi after. In other words, you have to have the order as Kohen Levi Yisrael, but once you break that order, you can't go Yisrael Levi. And he writes here in the parentheses, the Ramah, the Beis Yosef, Efshar lahalos Levi Rishon, v'yesh amr she'ein malam Levi Rishon. So there's a whole question about whether or not you should call a Levi, we call it Bimkom Kohen in place of a Kohen. Should the Levi have priority? It's a machlokas haposkim, and it's not necessarily a requirement. Im HaKohen shavib madregosol Yisrael. Let's say the Kohen is on the same level as the Yisrael. Gam below takanas chachamim hayitzarach lahakdimo. Shenemar legabe HaKohen v'kidashto. So even though we wouldn't have, let's say we wouldn't have this takana of chachamim, the Kohen should go first. Nevertheless, the Kohen should still go first because the pasuk says in Parshas Emor v'kidashto to sanctify. Elisha takana no'adel likbo shel inyan seder aliyas laTorah afil im Yisrael gadol bator me'HaKohen b'chozos yakdim HaSakohen b'nei darchei shalom. The Takana adds that even if the Yisrael, let's say the Yisrael is the Gadol Ador, and you have just a regular Kohen who's nothing, nevertheless, the Takana institutes that because of Darchei Shalom, the Kohen should go first. Let's say the Kohen is really a heathen, and the Yisrael is a Talmud Chacham, a great Torah scholar. So Nechukro HaRishonim B'dino, so the Rishonim have a machlokas in this halacha. Ladas HaRashba Tzarech Likro LaAliyah HaRishona Say Yisrael Shu Talmud Chacham. The Rashba says you should call the Yisrael, who's the Talmud Chacham, first. Well, that's Rav Amram going, Rav Natrunoi going, V'od Kam Rishonim Afilu Ima HaKohen Hu Ma'aretz LaInyan Aliyah LaTorah Yish Lakdim LaTalmud Chacham LaYisrael Kach Nogan LaMaisa. But most other poskim quotes from the Gaonim and Rishonim that even if the Kohen is an Ama'aretz, he's ignoramus, nevertheless he should still get the first Aliyah, and this is what we do. So it doesn't matter, we don't rank people. You could have the greatest person in the world there, but if there's a Kohen, the Kohen goes first. Le'itim Misoret Tzarech Gadol LaHosif Aliyah. So anybody who's been in a small shul or a gabbai or a rabbi and you understand this difficulty that arises, that sometimes you have to add an aliyah. Let's say you have only 3 aliyahs on a Monday or a Thursday, and you have 2 grooms, or you have 2 simchas or 2 yortites, whatever you want to call it, that people require 2 aliyahs. So since the first is going to be taken by a Kohen and a Levi, and you have 2 Yisraelim that need aliyah, how do you fit 2 Yisraelim in 1 aliyah? So Yotzei Sheim Lo Nosif Od Aliyah Yikupach Echad Chasanim V'Lo Yuchel Chad B'Balei Torah. So if you cut one of them out, obviously he's not going to be able to have an Aliyah. So what do you do? Ladas Ramah Mutu Lahosef Aliyah L'Torah Zeh. The Ramah says that you can add an Aliyah for this purpose. Ulam L'Maisa Nifsach She'asa Lahosef Al Shloshas Olim. However, we paskin that during the week we have only 3. You can't add 4. You can't have 5. We don't add any Aliyahs. Va'itzahi. So what is the practical advice then? Levakesh ma'kohen latzeis meis hakneses beis sheikor la'aliyah harishona, v'kiyin shlo sham hakohen yal yisrael la'aliyah harishona v'chachichu lahalas hashnei chasanim. So we have this little bit of ha'arama, a little bit of a clever trick that we ask the kohanim if they could possibly step out as we're getting ready to call people to the Torah. We look around. Oh, we call the kohen first. Oh, there's no kohen in the shul, so we can call the Yisrael first, and this way they could both have an aliyah. Obviously, you have to create an avira in shul. You have to create an atmosphere in which the kohanim are amenable to this. Usually you advise them in advance, and they have to understand that this is for a need. It's not something that's done regularly, normally, and this is something that happens not so commonly, but it does happen on occasion. And certainly our Kohanim are extremely amenable and understandable and accommodating. They always happen to get a phone call or something right as we're about to read the Torah. Interesting how that happens. But we try to do this. This is also mipnei darkei shalom, paths of peace, is that we don't want anybody to be insulted. So even Yisraelim get insulted, not just Kohanim. So we don't want the Yisraelim to get insulted, especially if they have a simcha, yurtzeit, whatever it is. So a wise gabbai or rabbi knows how to handle these things, and that's the best done in advance. And this way, we could avoid any sort of dispute whatsoever. So there's no disputing here, though, that we're excited to have you learning with us. So please continue davening for Chayil Yisrael, Gnei Yisrael, for Shalom L'chol Tzvei Yisrael, safety of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Nishmat Sar Daniel Shemar Rav Deron Mishal Shem Demo. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great day, and we'll see you here next time.